Hello, this is video number 5 of our analysis of The Adventures of Huckleberry and Finn by Mark Twain. Um, this covers the last 10 chapters of the book where Huck, in an attempt to rescue Jim from his second captivity, goes to what's her name? Aunt Sally's house. Um, and has to assume the identity of Tom Sawyer and then team with Tom Sawyer posing as his brother Sid in an attempt to rescue Jim from the near clutches of second slavery. By the way, I'm going to apologize for maybe my low tone of voice and my low volume. It's kind of late at night. My kids are sleeping. In fact, Harper is just on the other side of this wall, so I'm trying to be a little quiet, but also being thoughtful about your process through this whole thing. Anyway, let's talk hero's journey first. So, the last 4 sections of the hero's journey, right? We've gotten through all 8, right? Now we're back at the return. 9 o'clock is the return, 10 o'clock new life, 11 o'clock resolution, and then finally we're back at status quo. We're back at 12 o'clock. So here, the return is Huck having to go to Aunt Sally's, and this is a return to his, the ordinary world in that it's at least a familiar place for him. Aunt Sally's is not unlike the Widows or Aunt Polly back in town, in Missouri where he lived. They're in Arkansas now, but it's the same kind of structure. It's the same kind of world, and he is able to assume the identity of somebody he understands. So he is returning to, this quote unquote ordinary world that he came from. New life. Okay, so now he has gone through all of these adventures, right? All of these trials, all of this stuff. And now he has to take all of these things that he has learned and apply it to this new situation, this new life. So his portraying Tom Sawyer is his new life, maintaining that facade while still trying to help Jim get out of slavery. Resolution 11 o'clock is, and this is where the novel really falls apart. But the resolution really has nothing to do with Huck. It's Tom reveals that the whole thing was that their whole little plan there was a hoax, and that Jim has actually been free the whole time. And then finally, status quo. Huck tells us at the end that, it was a bother writing to this book. He wouldn't have done it if he would have known it was such a pain in the butt. And now he's headed out west. So, more than the last section, this section of the novel presents a lot of problems in analysis because just when we think that Huck is finally making some developments, he falls back and nothing really changes. And he we talk about the return to status quo. He kind of goes back to his original status quo. There doesn't seem to be much of a change in this character, and that's a problem in the writing. Now, don't get me wrong, this section is very funny. The whole caper that Tom insists that Huck and Jim go through to free Jim is really funny and absurd. And there's some really delightfully funny moments in here. But in terms of like, this is the great American novel, if this is the climax, if this is the apex, if this is what it is built towards, we have some problems because nothing changes, right? So if we're saying this is Americana, well, we're telling the world that we are unwilling to change. Be that as it may, that is me on my horse. Um, The other thing that the hero's journey at this point suggests is that in order to be successful in any endeavor, you have to be able to change your identity and your persona, which would be fine. And that's true. I mean, you are not the same person talking to your friends as you are talking to your grandparents. If you are, you're a psychopath and probably need some help, right? You're not the same person talking to the policeman who just pulled you over as you are talking with, let's say, your younger sister or your younger brother, right? You would be a sociopath, right? So we are constantly shifting our identity and our persona to suit the needs of the present situation. However, Huck has to lie his way through this last part of the book, right? He claims to be Tom Sawyer, right, in order to free Jim. They go through and they steal all this stuff, and he, feigns ignorance. He lies about why he was in the cellar when the butter melts all over his head and it looks like his brain is oozing out. There are all these things that he has to lie about, and that totally negates the apotheosis from the last section where he's like, telling the truth is just a better way out of things, right? You tell the truth, you're just, the truth is out then, right? So it completely negates that. And so that is a central problem with this section. He has this revelation, right, in the last section with the family that's going to get their money taken from them, that he just needs to tell the truth. And then he gets to a situation where, you know what, telling the truth probably wouldn't have helped, right? Or at least, okay, let me rephrase that. When he runs back to town and encounters Tom, if Tom had told the truth and said, "Oh, why are you trying to free Jim? He's already free." Or if Huck had told the truth, all of this would have been revealed. Huck doesn't need Tom to tell the truth, right? He should have. Tom is awful. But, if Huck had come back and been like, "I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. I'm tired. I'm very hungry. I'm not Tom Sawyer. Tom is coming. He should be here in a minute. I'm his friend. I just happen to be here because, well, I'll let Tom explain, right?" And then Tom shows up and everything is fine. But that's not what happens. So that totally nullifies Huck's apotheosis of telling the truth is a better thing because he goes along with this ridiculous scheme to get Jim out. Let's talk about the other three motifs: poverty, identity, and freedom. Poverty, cycle of poverty. Why do I have written he walked away from Tom's gang in the beginning, but he stays here? In the beginning, he didn't see any value to doing something that didn't have immediate financial benefit, right? The whole gang setup in the second chapter is, you know, yeah, it sounds great, but nothing was coming of it, so he doesn't want anything to do with it. But then here, at the end, there is not really any gain for him. Again, he could walk away. Huck could walk away and Jim would have been fine, number one. Number two, it wouldn't have affected him either way, right? He could head out west, live his life the way he wanted to, and none of that would have mattered. But he doesn't. He stays. There's a change. He breaks that cycle of poverty, that belief that, well, it doesn't benefit me now. What do I care? Or it doesn't even benefit me. Why do I care? Right? Which is a very poverty mindset type of thing to have, that, if it doesn't help me and it doesn't help me right now, it's not worth my time or my effort. And here he makes the time or the effort. So he has broken that cycle of poverty. And that break really comes when he realizes in the previous section that Jim is really the best friend he's had, more than anyone else. That loneliness he felt back in chapters 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, Jim is the remedy for that. And so he is willing to break that cycle of poverty in order to help his friend. And that's what he does, right? He stays, he does this ridiculous, ridiculous plan that Tom is constantly changing because it has to be a certain way, and then they go to do it, and Tom realizes this is way too hard. We need to fix it, right? Huck endures all of that, which is totally not something somebody in a poverty mindset would do, right? If it's hard the first time, it's not worth doing, right? It's not going to benefit me. It's too hard. Why do it? That would be the cycle of poverty. But he doesn't. He sticks with it, despite all the objections I made earlier about his lack of apotheosis. He proves himself to have made an improvement in terms of the cycle of poverty. Identity, the big one. The very first paragraph of the book is Huck erasing the blackboard, erasing the board, right? Comes out and says, "You don't know anything about me unless you've read this book by Mark Twain called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer." And if you've read that, and I'm paraphrasing here, most of it's a lie. So really, you're coming into this novel and you don't know anything about me and you're going to learn about me. And that's what happens through the novel, right? We see him struggle with his identity. Here he is, this 13-year-old boy, right? Essentially an orphan. He starts off being adopted by the widow, right? He doesn't like that and he gets essentially kidnapped by his dad. He doesn't like that identity. He's got to go here. He tries on all these different personas and it culminates to this point where he's got to take all of these things he's learned about his identity and use it, excuse me, to not only trick Aunt Sally and the family into believing that he is Tom Sawyer, but he has to change his personalities or his identity several times in this last section. There's the point where Tom makes him dress up like a servant girl in order to pass out, these letters to people warning them of trouble coming, right? He has to use his quick wits and cunning to explain why there's butter melting down his head or why he's in the cellar, right? Or why all of these things that happen. He has to use all of these things that he's learned throughout in order to navigate the situation. And although it's not, the apotheosis of, let's ignore the hero's journey at this point, he kind of masterfully uses all of these different things, all of these things he learned. If you really wanted to go through, you could choose a section where he has to, use his quick wits and thinking and link it to something that he did previously in the novel, right? You could do that. I'm guessing. I haven't done it, but I'm guessing that you could, right? So he has learned, and we learn that identity is adaptable, but the best identity is to be yourself, right? Being truthful and being true to who you are is the best baseline. And yes, you've got to change the way you act or the way you address people or the way you just navigate through the world at times. But for the most part, if you are a genuine person, that is the best way to live, right? And that's essentially what he says at the end. This was a big waste of my time. I was trying to do something, I was trying to explain who I am. I'm just going to be me and go move out west and have a good time. And that, I mean, nothing says Huck Finn more than that. You know, I I just want to go be me, and I'm going to go do it in a place where I can be me. And this was, written in the 1960s, but set in the 1940s, or maybe it was written in the 80s. No, it's after the Civil War. It's written in the 1880s, set in the 1840s. So, we're talking gold rush time where people are moving out to the West Coast. Um, the last motif, freedom. So, the end of the novel, both Jim and Huck get their freedom, right? Jim is freed. He's given $40 by Aunt Sally's husband. I don't remember his name. Um, since they treated him so poorly, and he says, "I told you I'd be a rich man someday," right? Which, we could talk about poverty at that point. But Jim is free, right? He has money. He can go. He can make his way back up to Northern Territory, um, and work to free his wife and his children. Huck is also free, right? He is free now to just leave. He has accomplished the mission that he sets out very late in the novel, which is another problem, and we talked about that before, right? Accomplishes his mission, even though he had very little to do with the whole thing. And now he is free to head out west and live out his life the way he did. So, what does this tell us about freedom? Okay. In the beginning of the novel, neither he nor Jim have any freedom, right? Jim, forgive the pun, it's black and white, right? He is a slave, he escapes, and even when he is traveling with Huck through, down the Mississippi, and then when the Duke and the King are there, he has a very limited freedom, but it's at least better than the slavery he was living under. And finally, he is granted that freedom at the end. If we're going to look at Jim's freedom as the basis for the theme of this novel, it's that freedom can only be granted by, the ruling white class. And I don't think that's what Twain was trying to say. So we need to focus on Huck, right? So Huck, you know, doesn't have the freedom that he wants at the beginning. And we're getting into the American dream and the idea of Americana, right? And ultimately, what the people who said that Huck Finn is the great American novel were alluding to. So Huck just wants to live his life the way he wants to, right? He doesn't want anybody to do, to tell him what to do. It's very Pinocchio. I got no strings on me right now, right? Or Ultron, depending on, do you want to go Pinocchio or do you want to go Age of Ultron? They both sing the song, right? Anyway, so doesn't have any freedom in the beginning. He's stuck with the widow. The widow makes him go to school, makes him wear nice clothes, makes him, right? Ends up with his dad. Dad makes him stay in the house all day, makes him go fishing, makes him. He doesn't like that, right? He's on the river. He's near freedom, but he never truly grasps freedom because he always has this overwhelming sense of loneliness to him that he refers to several times in the novel, right? In like chapter 5 or 6 or 3, no, chapter 2, sorry. When he's looking out the window and he talks about how lonesome he is. In chapters 5 and 6, when his dad is not in the cabin, he talks about how lonely he is. There are moments throughout the middle sections where he's nowhere near Jim and he talks about how lonely he is. And then ultimately at that moment where he decides that, the forget it, I'll go to hell moment is when he decides that he can't experience true freedom until that loneliness um has been satisfied, right? Jim is his best friend. Jim is the one who has been his supernatural aid throughout this whole thing. The only way Huck is going to be able to experience true freedom is by repaying his friend who has, taught him how, how friendship works, right? So he goes and he frees Jim, and now he is free to go off. So what does this tell us, right? Is that freedom is always, I don't know, this is going to sound really cheesy. Freedom is what you make of it. I don't know, it's not quite Jean-Paul Sartre as other people, but it's close to that. It's hard to state exactly what it is Twain is saying here, and I'm struggling. I'm going to be honest. I'm struggling with this interpretation at this point. What is he saying about freedom? Right? At any point, Huck could leave and go, but he doesn't. He keeps coming back to Jim. Why does he keep coming back to Jim? But then when Jim is finally able to go and pursue his family, Huck just decides to go out west. I I don't know. I'm going to be honest, I don't know. I don't get it. Again, problem with this novel. The Deus Ex Machina of, oh, you were free the whole time. It's very Wizard of Oz, right? You had the ability to go back the whole time. You just needed to click your heels together. Oh, Jim, you were free the whole time. You just needed to come back and talk to Aunt Polly, right? It's it's an unsatisfying ending, right? Whereas, I won't go into details, but it's making me struggle with the interpretation of freedom. Maybe you have a clear idea of what that is, or maybe we're all just sitting here scratching our heads and commiserating together. All right, so that's that. I don't know what the next novel will be. Thank you so much for watching these videos. Thank you so much for your support. Subscribe, smash that subscribe button. Those of you former students, I appreciate you sticking with me. Those of you who I've never met, welcome. You can suggest novels for me to do. I know many of you have asked me to do the fourth section of Between the World and Me, and I'm totally intending on doing that. But if you have any other suggestions, throw them out. I'd be more than happy to help you. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.